at the party for the 50 years I had given my whole life to. The new boss stood up and told the entire company its history. Every name that mattered, he said. Every person who built this place. And mine was not among them. I sat in the third row, in the good dress I'd bought special. And I listened to a man narrate the story of a company I had held together with my own two hands for 31 years. And I waited for my name, the way you wait for a step in the dark that isn't there. It never came. And then, when he was done erasing me, he smiled. And he called me up in front of everyone, and he handed me an envelope. A retirement package I had never asked for, the way you'd tip the help on your way out the door. He was so pleased with himself. He had no idea what the founder of that company had left 4 years earlier in a lawyer's leather folder with my name on it. My name is Margaret Holleran. Everyone calls me Peg. And this is the story of the night I found out what I was really worth to the company I loved, and the night everyone else found out too. Let me tell you what office manager meant at Harrow & Sons for 31 years. Because the title is a lie of omission, and the lie is the whole point. Harrow & Sons made industrial parts, unglamorous, essential things, the kind of components that hold the modern world together without anyone ever knowing they exist. Rather like me, now that I think of it. I started there at 31 years old as a receptionist, and over 3 decades, I became, by title, the office manager. But titles are cheap, and what I actually did could not be bought at any price. I ran that company, not on paper, in every way that mattered. I knew where every dollar went and every part was made. I knew the name of every client and the name of every client's spouse, and which ones took their coffee black and which ones you never, ever called before 10. I built the systems that kept the orders flowing and the invoices paid. I was the one who remembered why we did things the way we did. The institutional memory of the whole place, the person the young executives came to. Quietly, when they didn't understand something they were supposed to already know. When a crisis hit at 2 a.m, mine was the phone that rang, and mine was the voice that fixed it. I was, in the plainest terms, the load-bearing wall of that company. And, like a load-bearing wall, I was invisible precisely because I was holding everything up. Nobody admires the wall. They only notice it if it comes down. And one man knew that. One man saw me perfectly, the whole time. His name was Walter Harrow. Walter built Harrow & Sons out of nothing. A rented garage, a single machine, and a stubbornness that bordered on a character flaw. He was gruff and impatient, and generous in ways he'd have denied to your face. And Walter, unlike almost everyone else who ever walked through those doors, understood exactly what I was. Peg, he told me once, years ago, you and I both know that if you walked out that door, this whole place would be dust inside a year. Don't think I don't know it. Don't think I'll ever forget it. I loved that man. Not romantically. We both had our own good marriages, but with the deep, uncomplicated loyalty of two people, who built something together, anew, without saying it much, exactly what the other one was worth. For 3 decades, Walter and I ran Harrow & Sons side by side, him with his name on the door, and me with my hands on the controls. Let me give you one night so you understand what ran the company actually means, because it's another one of those phrases that goes soft from overuse. It was maybe 15 years ago, 2 in the morning. My home phone rang. This was back when your home phone ringing at 2 a.m. meant your whole stomach dropped. It was our plant foreman. A shipment that absolutely had to leave by 6 a.m. Our single biggest client's entire production line depended on it, had been built wrong. A whole pallet of the wrong specification. And if it went out, we'd fail. The client. And if it didn't go out, we'd fail the client. And either way, by breakfast, we might lose the account that was a third of our revenue. I got dressed. I drove to the plant at 2:30 in the morning. And over the next 3 hours, I did the thing I did. The thing no title on any org chart described. I found the error. I figured out which parts could be reworked in time and which couldn't. I called a supplier I'd kept on good terms with for 20 years and got him out of bed to cover the gap. I reorganized the whole shipping run on the loading dock floor with a clipboard and a marker. And I got a corrected shipment out the door at 5:52 a.m. The client never knew anything had happened. That was the point. They never knew because I made sure they never knew. Walter came in at 8, heard the whole story from the foreman, walked straight to my office, and just stood in the doorway looking at me for a moment. Then he said, "You saved the company again last night, Peg. 2nd time this year." And he went and got me a coffee himself. The boss getting the office manager a coffee, which he did whenever he wanted to say a thank you, too big for words. That's what running a company is. It's the 2 a.m. phone call and the corrected shipment nobody ever hears about. It doesn't have a title because it can't be contained by one. And then Walter got sick. Near the end, when he knew where it was going, he called me into his office one gray afternoon, and he closed the door, which he almost never did. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. And he said, "Peg, I've taken care of something." With Dunmore. Dunmore was the company's attorney, a careful old man Walter trusted completely. Something to make sure that what you are to this company gets recognized properly one day. Whether the fools who come after me can see it or not. He waved his hand, impatient with his own sentiment. Don't ask me about it. Just know it's done. It's in writing. It's real. When the time comes, you'll understand. I thought he meant a nice pension. A bonus, maybe, for a loyal old employee. I thanked him. I held his hand. I didn't ask. I've replayed that afternoon 1,000 times since. And the thing that undoes me is how tired he was, and how, even dying, he was still thinking about protecting me. That was Walter. He knew his son. He'd raised Trent, and he loved him, and he saw him clearly. A father can hold both of those things at once. And he knew, with the terrible clarity that comes at the end, Exactly what Trent would try to do to the woman who'd built the company alongside him. He couldn't change his son. You can't. By then, it's too late for changing. But he could reach past his own death and set one thing in place. A single stone laid across a future he wouldn't live to see. To make sure that when the moment came, the truth would have a way to walk into the room on its own. When the time comes, you'll understand, he said. And then he squeezed my hand, this dying man, and he said one more thing, quietly, almost to himself. You were the best decision I ever made, Peg. Hiring you. Don't let anybody tell you different when I'm gone. Especially not anybody named Harrow. I laughed because I thought he was being sentimental. I didn't understand that he was being precise. He was always being precise. Walter died that winter, and I grieved him like family, and I stayed on, and I kept the load-bearing wall standing, because that's what he would have wanted, and because I didn't know how to do anything else. And then his son took over. Trent Harrow had his father's name and none of his father's eyes. Walter could see people. Trent could only see rankings. Who was above him, worth charming, and who was below him, worth ignoring. And in Trent's ranking of the world, a 62-year-old office manager was somewhere near the furniture. Useful, perhaps. Certainly not important. Definitely not someone whose worth he needed to trouble himself to understand. Trent had big plans. He wanted to modernize, which mostly meant putting his own stamp on things that already worked. And the trouble with a load-bearing wall, if you're a man like Trent, is that it's old and it's in your way. And you can't imagine that the reason the ceiling is up is anything to do with it. He started small. He'd reorganize a system I'd built and present it to the executives as his innovation. He'd take a client relationship I had personally tended for 20 years, have one lunch, and describe it afterward as a connection I've developed. He stopped bringing his questions to me, not because he'd learned the answers, but because he'd decided that needing the office manager was beneath the CEO. Things started going quietly wrong in the places where I used to catch them, but Trent didn't notice that yet. He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the surface of a company that was still, for the moment, coasting on my work. There was a leadership meeting, maybe 6 months into Trent's reign, that I think about the way you press on a bruise. Trent had called it to unveil his operational modernization initiative, his big vision, the thing that was going to prove he was his father's equal. And he stood at the head of the table and presented, point by point, a reorganization of our fulfillment process. The executives nodded and murmured that it was impressive, forward-thinking, exactly what the company needed. It was mine. Every point of it. It was a plan I had written 3 years earlier that Walter and I had implemented together, that had been quietly running the company the entire time. Trent had found it in the files, put his name on the cover page, and was now presenting it to a room as his own innovation, to people who had been living inside that very system for 3 years, without realizing it, because that's how good it was, Because good systems become invisible. Like me. I sat at the far end of the table, where the office manager sits, taking the minutes. And I watched a man take credit for my work in front of a room full of people who were currently, at that exact moment, benefiting from my work, and not one of them knew. I said nothing. I typed the minutes, and I thought, Walter, your son is going to run this beautiful thing into the ground, and he's going to do it while congratulating himself. And he is never, ever going to understand what he broke, because he can't see the person who's been holding it up. It was the loneliest meeting of my life. I'd been to a lot of meetings. And slowly, unmistakably, he began to ease me toward the door. Comments about fresh energy, about planning for transitions, about how I'd earned a rest. I could read it as clearly as I could read one of my own ledgers. Trent Harrow was going to push me out, take credit for everything I'd built, and never once know what he was throwing away. I'll be honest with you about how I felt, because I think you deserve the truth of it. I felt something break. 31 years. The man's own father had held my hand and told me the place would be dust without me. And here was the son, treating me like a relic to be quietly wheeled out before I embarrassed anyone. It's a particular grief, being erased by the child of the person who saw you best. Then came the 50th anniversary. 50 years of Harrow & Sons. It was to be a grand celebration in the company's main hall. The whole staff, the major clients, speeches, a catered dinner, the works. And here is the bitter joke at the center of it. I organized it. Of course I did. Nobody else knew how. I booked the hall and arranged the catering and built the guest list and wrote half the logistics that made the evening possible, invisibly, the way I'd done everything for 3 decades. And I let myself hope. I'm not ashamed to admit it. After 31 years, after Walter's own words, I let myself believe that at the celebration of the company's half-century, someone might finally, publicly, say my name. Might finally acknowledge, in front of everyone, that the quiet woman in the corner had been part of the beams and mortar of the place all along. I bought a new dress for it, navy blue. I remember standing in front of the mirror the morning of, an old woman, in a new dress, letting herself hope like a girl. I want to defend that hope, because looking back, it seems almost foolish, and I don't think it was. 31 years is a long time to give a thing. I had been there for the rented garage days and the near bankruptcy of the 3rd year, and the night we almost lost our biggest client, and the afternoon Walter cried in his office when his wife passed and asked me to sit with him because I was the only one he could be human in front of. I had earned a place in the story of Harrow & Sons the way you earn a callus, slowly, through use, until it's simply part of you. So, no, it wasn't foolish to hope that at the 50th anniversary of a thing I'd spent half my life building, someone might say my name out loud. It was the most reasonable hope in the world. That's what made what happened next cut the way it did. It's not the unreasonable hopes that break your heart. It's the ones that should have been safe. I even let myself imagine, standing at that mirror, that maybe Trent would surprise me. That maybe on this of all nights, he'd find it in himself to be his father's son for 5 minutes and acknowledge the woman in the corner. I fixed my hair. I practiced looking gracious. I was 62 years old, and I stood in front of a mirror, rehearsing how to receive a thank you I was never going to get. The evening was beautiful. I'd made sure of that. And then Trent Harrow stood up to give the anniversary address. And I learned exactly where I ranked in his ledger of the world. He was a good speaker, in the way that hollow men often are. He told the story of Harrow and Sons, 50 years, from the rented garage to the company we were now. He spoke movingly about his father, which was the one part I couldn't begrudge him. He named the executives. He named the plant managers. He named a sales director who'd been with us 4 years. He thanked the leadership team that built this company into what it is. He painted a whole portrait of 5 decades of Harrow and Sons. And I was not in it. Not a word. Not a mention. 31 years. And in the official history of the company, as told at its 50th birthday, Margaret Halloran did not exist. I sat in my navy dress in the 3rd row, and I felt the hope go out of me, like heat out of a room. I kept my face still. I'd had a lifetime of practice keeping my face still. But inside, something that had been standing for 31 years quietly sat down. And then it got worse, because Trent wasn't finished with me. He had one more thing. "Before we raise a glass," he said, "I want to do something special. There's someone here who's been with us a very long time. Our office manager, Peg Halloran." A smattering of applause, heads turning to find me. "Peg, come on up here." My legs carried me up. 31 years of doing what the company needed carried me up. And Trent put his arm around me, in front of the whole staff and every major client. And he said, "Peg has decided it's time to enjoy a well-earned retirement." I had decided no such thing. So on behalf of all of us, we want to send her off with our thanks. And he handed me an envelope, a retirement package, presented as his gift, his idea, his generosity, the graceful removal of the old furniture, performed as a kindness in front of everyone, so that I could not possibly object without seeming ungrateful. The room applauded. I stood there, holding the envelope, smiling the still smile. Being retired against my will at my own company's birthday party by a man who didn't know the first true thing about me. And that is the exact moment old Mr. Dunmore stood up at the back of the room. I almost didn't notice him at first. A careful, elderly man in a good dark suit, making his way slowly toward the front, a worn leather folder held against his chest. Walter's attorney. Dunmore, who had been at the company nearly as long as I had, who had drawn up every important document Harrow and Sons ever signed. "Trent," he said, and his quiet voice cut through the applause in a way that loud voices never can. Before the toast, if I might say a few words, there's a matter I'm obligated to address, and this is, I think, the proper moment. Walter was quite specific about the timing. Trent, thrown but unwilling to look rattled in front of the clients, spread his hands genially. "Of course, Mr. Dunmore. The floor is yours." Dunmore came and stood beside me. He gave me a look I didn't understand yet. Something gentle and a little sorrowful and a little like anticipation. And he opened the leather folder. 50 years is a good time for the truth to come out, he said to the room. 4 years ago, not long before he passed, Walter Harrow came to my office to execute a transfer of ownership. It was witnessed, notarized, and has been held properly in trust ever since, per his instructions, to be disclosed at this exact milestone. He looked down at the document. Walter directed that in recognition of 3 decades of service, without which, his words, this company would not exist, and every person in this room knows it. A 20% voting ownership stake in Harrow & Sons be transferred, in full, to Margaret Halloran. The hall went absolutely silent. Effective 4 years ago, Dunmore continued into that silence, and in force today, which means that Ms. Halloran is not, as you've just described, Trent, a retiring office manager. He turned and looked directly at Trent Harrow, and his old voice did not waver. She is the second largest shareholder of this company, larger than any executive here, second only to yourself, with full voting rights. I want to tell you what it is like to have your entire life reweighed in public in a single sentence. It is like being underwater for 31 years and suddenly, without warning, breaking the surface. The room, which had spent the whole evening looking through me, turned as one and looked at me. Really looked. The executives who'd never learned my last name. The clients who'd only ever spoken to me on the phone. And Trent, with his arms still half raised from handing me the envelope, his face performing a slideshow of every stage of understanding, from confusion to disbelief to a dawning, sickening comprehension of what he had just done. On a stage, in front of everyone, to a woman who owned 1/5 of his company. He'd just publicly, generously, magnanimously retired, the second largest owner of Harrow & Sons. He'd erased her from the company's history in a speech and then tried to walk her out the door. And the founder's own attorney had let him finish every word of it before pulling the floor out from under him. Walter, you old fox. He'd known exactly what his son would become, and exactly what his son would try to do to me. And he'd set this moment 4 years in the future, like a man planting a tree he'd never see grow. "Don't ask me about it," he'd said. "When the time comes, you'll understand." I understood now, Walter. I understood. I want to tell you what that felt like, because it wasn't triumph, not in that first moment. It was grief, oddly, a great warm wave of it. Because standing there in that hall, hearing an old lawyer read out proof that the man I'd loved and lost had seen me all along, had valued me so precisely that he'd built a machine to protect me from beyond the grave, I felt Walter in the room. For 4 years, I'd missed him as an absence, a silence where a friend used to be. And now, suddenly, he was present, more present than he'd been since the day he died, reaching through a leather folder to put his hand on my shoulder in front of everyone and say one last time the thing he'd always said, "I know exactly what you're worth, Peg. Don't let anybody tell you different." I had to press my lips together very hard. The whole room thought I was overwhelmed by the money, by the shares, by the reversal. I wasn't. I was saying goodbye to my friend all over again. And hello. And thank you. All at once, in a crowded room, with everyone watching. 4 years too late, and exactly on time. And then the evening delivered its final blow to Trent Harrow, and it came from a direction he never saw. At a table near the front sat our single largest client, a woman named Grace Ann Okafor, whose company had done business with Harrow & Sons for over 20 years, and who was, that night, a guest of honor. And in the ringing silence after Dunmore's revelation, Grace Ann Okafor stood up. "I think," she said, "since we're telling the truth tonight, I should add something." She looked around the room, and then she looked at me, and she smiled. "I've done business with this company for 22 years, and in all that time, my business was never with the Harrow name. It was with Peg. Peg is the reason we stayed through 2 recessions and a dozen better offers. Peg is the one who answered at midnight when a shipment failed, who I trusted with contracts I wouldn't trust to my own brother." She turned, deliberately, to Trent. "So, I'll be honest, Mr. Harrow. I came here tonight already a little concerned about the direction of things. And if what I just heard is right, if this company was about to push Peg Halloran out the door, then I'd have followed her out of it. My account goes where Peg goes. It always has. You just never knew it." And in that moment, I watched Trent Harrow's entire position, his authority, his plan, his careful little coup against the furniture, collapse in real time. The votes had shifted. The largest client had just declared her loyalty was to me. And the whole room now understood, all at once, what Walter had understood all along. What I had spent 31 years being too quiet to say. That the load-bearing wall had been holding up the ceiling the entire time. Here is what I did next. And I did it the way Walter would have, not the way my wounded heart wanted to. I did not destroy Trent Harrow. God knows I could have. I had the shares, I had the client, I had the room, and I had 31 years of being erased, burning in my chest. A word from me that night, and I could have voted him out, humiliated him the way he'd humiliated me. Walked out with the company's biggest client and let his inheritance turn to dust in his hands. Part of me wanted to. I won't pretend otherwise. But I looked at that hall. The plant workers who'd have lost their jobs in the chaos, the clients who'd have scattered, the 50 years Walter built, and I understood that revenge would have burned down the very thing I'd spent my life protecting. And I have never, not once in 31 years, been willing to hurt Harrow and Sons to make a point. So I took the envelope Trent had handed me, and I handed it back to him, quietly. And I said, loud enough for the front tables to hear, I won't be needing this. I'm not retiring. I'm taking my seat on the board. I want you to understand what I gave up in that sentence, because it matters. In the 90 seconds after Dunmore closed his folder, I had a whole other speech loaded. Every erasure, every fresh energy, every time Trent had taken my work and called it his vision, every year he'd treated me like furniture. I had the votes, I had the client, I had the room, and I had 31 years of swallowed insults burning in my chest. And I could have stood there and dismantled Walter's son in front of 300 people and the acquirers. And it would have been justice. And it would have felt, for about a minute, like the best thing that ever happened to me. But I looked at him, at the frightened, hollow, suddenly small man who I just watched his whole idea of himself collapse in public. And I heard Walter in my head, the way I still do. And Walter wouldn't have said, destroy him. Walter would have said, Peg, don't burn down the thing we built to win an argument with a boy who was never as strong as he pretended to be. So I put the speech down. I have never regretted it. A speech would have made me feel powerful for a minute. Choosing not to give it made me powerful for good, because it meant the company survived. The workers kept their jobs. And I got to spend the rest of my life as the woman who saved Harrow and Sons twice. Once at 2 a.m, 15 years ago, and once by refusing to. Set it on fire the night I finally could have. I claimed the board seat my ownership entitled me to. I stayed, on my terms now, not as furniture, but as an owner, with a voice no one could talk over ever again. I want to tell you what happened out on the plant floor, though, because that's the part that made me cry. Later, alone in my car. Word of that night traveled through Harrow and Sons the way news travels through a place where the real work gets done. Fast and accurate and without any of the polish. The men and women on the line, the shipping crew, the machinists, the people I'd fixed things for at 2 a.m. for 31 years. The people who'd always known exactly what I was, even if the executives never. They found out that Peg from the office, the one who answered the phone at midnight, the one who'd gotten their bonuses fixed and their schedules sorted, and their problems quietly solved for 3 decades, actually owned a fifth of the company. And they were glad, not envious, glad. The foreman who'd called me that night 15 years ago came and found me the next week, and he shook my hand with both of his, the way Walter used to. And he said, Miss Peg, the whole floor's saying the same thing. They're saying, finally, somebody who actually knows how this place works has a real say in it. We always figured you ran it. Now it's official. And I had to go sit in my car for a while after that. Because 31 years of being unseen by the people upstairs had somehow never dimmed how clearly I was seen by the people who mattered most, the the ones down where the actual work happened. They'd known all along. They'd just never had the power to say it out loud. Now, finally, one of their own did. Old Mr. Dunmore, the attorney, retired not long after. Before he did, he came to my office with a small box, and inside it was a note in Walter's handwriting that Walter had left with him, along with the ownership documents, to be given to me only after the truth came out. I won't tell you everything it said. It was between Walter and me. But it ended with a line I keep framed on my desk now, where I can see it every day. It said, "Peg, I gave you the shares because it was owed, not as a gift. You earned every point of it with your own 2 hands, in the dark, when no one was watching. Now, everyone's watching. Go build something. W.H." I did, Walter. I have been. Every day since. I didn't oust Trent. I did something he found far more educational. I made him work alongside the woman he'd tried to erase as an equal every single day until he learned, slowly, painfully, the difference between having a title and doing the work. Some men never learn it. To his credit, over time, I think Trent finally did. Grief and humility are stern teachers, and he got a full course of both. It didn't happen fast, and it didn't happen prettily. For the first year, Trent was sullen and defensive, a man forced to share. A table with the living proof of his worst moment. But something shifted the day a crisis hit. A real one. The kind that used to make my phone ring at 2 a.m. And Trent, out of his depth, actually came to my office and closed the door and said, in a voice that clearly cost him everything, "I don't know how to fix this. Dad would have known. You'd know. Will you show me?" And I did. Not because I'd forgiven him yet, but because the company needed saving, and that had always been the only thing that moved me. And I watched him watch me work, and I watched him understand, maybe for the first time, that the thing he'd inherited wasn't a title or a building or his father's name. It was a set of relationships and instincts and 30 years of hard-won judgment that lived in a person, not on an org chart. You can't inherit that. You can only learn it, slowly, from someone willing to teach you, if you're humble enough to ask. Trent got humble enough to ask. It took losing almost everything in front of 300 people to get him there. But he got there. And I've seen worse men fail to. And the first thing I did with my new voice, the very first policy I pushed through that board, was this: that Harrow and Sons would never again let a person hold the whole place up in silence. That the invisible ones, the load-bearing walls, the pegs, would be named, credited, seen, and given a path while they were still around to enjoy it. Not 4 years after someone died and left it in a folder. The first person I named was a woman in our accounts department named Dolores. Dolores had been with the company 26 years, and she was the one who actually understood our entire billing system, not the software. the real thing. The 1,000 little exceptions and histories and handshake agreements that no manual contained. When Dolores took a vacation, things quietly broke. And when she came back, things quietly worked again. And in 26 years, not one executive had ever connected those two facts. She was me, one department over. So, one of the first things I did with my board seat was create a real role for Dolores, with a real title and real money, and a seat at the table where the decisions got made. And I watched a woman who had been invisible for a quarter of a century get told, out loud, in front of people, that the company knew what she was. She cried in the ladies' room, the way we do. And then she came back and did the job magnificently, the way we also do. Because the ones who have been holding everything up in silence tend to be extraordinary the moment you finally hand them the daylight. There were more after Dolores. I made sure there were always more. It is the thing I am proudest of, more than the shares, more than the reckoning. I turned the lights on for the people in the corners. Somebody had left a folder to turn them on for me. I decided I was not going to make anyone else wait for a funeral. I could not unerase my own 31 years. But I could make sure no one else's got erased after me. At the party for the 50 years I had given my whole life to, the new boss told the entire company its history and left me out of it completely, and then tried to hand me my own coat. He didn't know that the man who founded it all had seen me clearly, to the very end, and had written me into the story permanently, and had trusted a careful old lawyer to make sure the truth surfaced at the one moment it would matter most. So here is what I want to leave you with, whoever you are, especially if you're the quiet one. The one holding up a ceiling nobody thanks you for. The one they've started to talk about as though you were already gone. Do the work anyway. Be the wall anyway. Not because you're guaranteed a leather folder and a founder who saw you. Most of us don't get the folder, and I know that, and it isn't fair. But because the work is real, and it holds up real things and real people, and no speech that leaves out your name can change what your hands actually built. They can erase you from the history. They cannot erase you from the load.